Paul Carlock. I retired in December of 22 from the Army. I did over 24 years. Retired as Lieutenant Colonel, but I think we're here today to talk specifically about Bakuba. And I was lucky enough to be the company commander of Delta Company 112 Cav for 28 months, the year long train up for Bakuba. And then I commanded in Bakuba pretty much the whole time, gave up command the last month before we left. Was lucky enough to have some great guys, great missions, great soldiers, and great leaders. And I got the unique experience. As I said earlier, a lot of the company commanders who started with us during that train up, a lot of them switched out at some point, but I was lucky enough to stay in position as the commander of Delta 112 for the whole time, up until the very end when we were getting ready to come home from Bakuba.
Wow, that's a long time to be in command, and what a story. So yeah, so let's start with the train up, or what your military experience before Bakuba.
Yeah, so I was kind of lucky. I came in the Army and, of course, armor officer. I came in 1998, so I got a few years experience before 9/11. And back then, all we trained for, we didn't do any counterinsurgency stuff, which was the hallmark of operations in Bakuba. We just did heavy operations, training for tank on tank, that kind of stuff. Not really any stuff on the ground. Every once in a while, we'd work with the infantry guys, but a lot of tank stuff. We did that, and of course, 9/11 changed everything for everyone. I had that several year experience when I was lieutenant years were that. And then, of course, I came to Fort Hood, Texas as a young captain and waited on staff for a while. I actually did a year-long deployment with 3/8 Cav. That was my first deployment to Iraq. And then when I got back from that, I took command of Delta 112 in 2005. So in the summer of 2005, when we all came back from the first Cav's first Iraq deployment. So yeah, it's kind of unique, just like everybody learning counterinsurgency stuff, drinking from a fire hose, adjusting to that. Even though we took our tanks, we practiced and trained with tanks before Bakuba, and we took them to Bakuba. We were only on tanks probably about 30% of the time in Bakuba. Most of the time, even my tank platoons, myself, we would go out in Humvees, and then we would dismount and do dismounted patrols, dismounted missions. We'd be augmented with tanks and Bradleys, and some missions we'd only be on tanks and Bradleys. But most of the time, my tankers had to learn counterinsurgency stuff and really kicking indoors and doing a lot of what were traditional infantry tasks. And then, of course, we were lucky enough to be augmented with an infantry platoon that came from Bravo 112. I trained with them for that whole year leading up to Bakuba, and then I had that, we called them Blue Platoon. We had that infantry platoon with us the entire 15 months in Bakuba, and they became part of it. At that time, we were 2 tank platoons, 1 infantry platoon, and that was Delta 112 that trained for Bakuba and then went to Bakuba.
Yeah. That's a great breakdown and a lot of info about this setup. And like you were saying, going to the modular force and then the task organization, and then, but taking tankers off the tank, put them in Humvees, not really probably something. And we were talking earlier about our train up, our little battalion stick lanes and stuff.
Yeah.
Probably nothing we did a very good job at getting you ready for, but how was like JRTC?
Well, and everybody they called it a mission readiness exercise. You either went to the NTC or JRTC for a month to train up, and you did some heavier force on force stuff, but a lot of stuff working in small villages and big villages. And 112 during that year train up for Bakuba, we went, like you said, to Fort Polk, Louisiana, to JRTC. I had been there as a tank platoon leader and done heavy stuff, and had been in Shugart Gordon, which was their mount site. So going as a company, once again, 2 tank and 1 infantry, the train up was really good. They did a great job of incorporating some heavy stuff, but really making my tank company go into these cities, big and small, deal with the people, deal with a lot of counterinsurgency missions. So that was definitely a good train up. That, and then several other training things that we did, either platoon or company sticks and gunnery. So I think that ultimately led to the battalion's success in Bakuba, because we had that year-long train up that took us there. That kind of the final point of that, like you said, was going to JRTC. It was tough, and rightly so. They make it tough. Later on in my career, I was an OC at the NTC, so I know how important it is for So I've seen on both sides the blue units going through the training, and then spent 3 years as an OC. So that final piece of our train up to get the company and the battalion ready to go to Bakuba was important.
Yeah. It was a great experience. I know the company's, the entire battalion is pushed, and that's part of their mission. And as you learn being an OC, it's all part of their big plan. But you brought it up, Sugar Gordon, always the big shootout to end the exercise there.
Oh yeah, I've seen a whole battalion, usually even an infantry battalion, full of over 1,000 guys get chewed up in Shugar Gordon. But that's what it's meant. It's meant to show the training center is your worst day, your worst mission. Just like playing football, practice should always be tougher than the game. That's what makes you good. I think that our battalion and the company's train up leading to Bakuba is definitely a force multiplier.
Yeah. All right, so deployed, I guess that was OIF, 2 or 3, whatever the numbers was.
Yeah, I've lost track. Yes, I think it was OIF 2, and it was the First Cavalry Division. It was our second deployment. It was just supposed to be, a year deployment. We knew that. We left in October of 2006. Up to that point, the Army had only done year-long deployments. And I think about 3 or so months in, we got notice that we were getting extended for 15 months. So that was a major change. We had not hit the 15 months yet, but just knowing that the goalpost for going home was pushed to the right. 15 months, as you know very well, is a long time. And I know it was hard on the soldiers and leaders. And just for me personally, I had just got married in June. So 3 months after I got married, of course, she knew that I was going to be gone for 12 months, but that 12 turned into 15. And then, as you know, the fighting was just so intense for us in Bakuba, and unfortunately, we lost so many soldiers. So, what my wife went through was what a lot of the families, wives, and husbands, and everything went through during that long deployment to Bakuba.
Yeah, and the additional kick to the junk for a lot of guys was, or guys and girls, some people were already on leave, so they came back to find out, oh, you're staying even longer now, and it's like,
oh yeah. Yeah, my gunner was, we had to send, I think we never sent more than 10% of our people home on leave a month, which was just a few people. But for, a tank company with infantry platoon attached, I had 95 guys. So even just losing a few guys, that was painful to do operations. So yeah, my gunner was the first guy that I sent on leave. We got there in October and he went on leave in December, which was great because he was home for Christmas. But then, he got notification. Well, no, you're going to be here almost a year from this point.
Yeah. So we deploy. Anything from Kuwait? Anything stand out?
Well, that I think it was about a 3-week train up in Kuwait. You do the stuff like the vehicle trainers, and we shot a kind of a gunnery. You're out in the desert, so it's just I don't think anybody. Pretty good training, about as good as you can get. Not as good as our training centers back home. But I don't think anybody enjoys being in Kuwait. You're in the middle of the desert, stuck on a little base. So yeah, that 3 weeks was not very fun to do that. But it's necessary to get that kind of in theater training and get the guys ready to go. And just working with my leadership at the company, my NCOs, trying to get the soldiers ready and the correct mindset for us to cross into Iraq.
And then, feel free, correct me or jump in there, but until that point, there really wasn't a pinpoint where we were going. So then we get to Kuwait, and it's like, yeah, you're going to Bakuba now. So
yeah.
The group of us that go forward, Captain Moores, myself, a few others, we go forward. Now we're starting to send actual info back. So you're getting the info of where you're going for the first time, or kind of the first time, and now you're getting everybody to do the required training, but yet here is the no shit. Here is where we're going.
Yeah, it's very tough. As you know, Diyala is just such a unique province of Iraq. My first tour to Iraq was in Baghdad, and Baghdad is its own animal. It's just so huge, so many the population and size. But Diyala, massive province. Several big cities. Bakuba is not as I think back then it had around 600,000 or so, something like that. So still a big city, but Diyala was so special because of the influx of population. I think it touched part of the Iranian border. There was a lot of Iranian influence coming across, a lot of Jaish al-Mahdi, Shia militia, some Sunni militias, and then, of course, what we would find out. What we didn't realize, I guess we knew some Al-Qaeda presence would be there in Diyala in our area, but I personally didn't realize how big Al-Qaeda's presence was, especially in my battle space, in Delta Company's battle space, and we quickly found out. So you've got this massive mix of multiple enemy forces, JAM, Al-Qaeda, other Sunni, a lot of corruption, a lot of Iranian influence, and you saw that in weapons, tactics, and just stuff. So definitely all that year-long preparation you asked for. They gave us a lot of tactical tasks, a lot of preparation, but you could not really prepare for the uniqueness of Diyala until you kind of got there.
Yeah, I mean, that's spot on. And we also did not know how, well, the surge wasn't official and all that until we got there, boots on ground. But then no one knew what the second and third order effects of the surge was going to be. So then, as Iraq's being cleared by these additional forces, more people are flooding the whole Bakuba Diyala area. So all right, we get to Bakuba. You come in those CH-47s into the dark, you land. We kind of helped everybody get to their footprints. Take it from there.
Yeah, so it's crazy, FOB Warhorse, a big FOB, really the brigade, I guess the brigade headquarters. So huge FOB. You had other units coming in and out, but really it was, 3rd Brigade or 1st Cav was there. So, we had our chews, our living area that had, where you slept, and then showers and stuff. Of course, the chow hall, that was the central part, and a lot of MWR stuff. The battalion headquarters. One thing that was unique about Delta is most of the battalion headquarters and the companies were in one area, and just for whatever reason, Delta Company was about half a mile or quarter mile away in a different area, and we were kind of there with the battalion S4 shop. So for reasons I'll discuss here in a minute, we were really close with the 4 shop. We considered the 4 shop the definitely part of the alumni association, because my second XO, Josh Southworth, was plucked out of being my XO a few months after we got there and taken to be the battalion S4. So we had close ties with the 4 shop, both literally and figuratively. But yeah, we were kind of, our company headquarters was a little bit away from the battalion. So, but of course, we did stuff with them. But yeah, Warhorse was just a huge base that, everybody experienced in Iraq or Afghanistan. And then we would do missions out of there. But that was our home base for most of it. Now, later on, about halfway through the deployment, Delta Company actually got a COP, like a little Ford mini base out in the city of Bakuba. And I would have about 2/3 of the company down there and 1 platoon rotating back for maintenance and downtime back on the FOB. So for a couple months there, we kind of moved off the FOB, and we're doing stuff in an Iraqi city. Most of the time we were based out of the FOB, which, of course, is good and bad, that huge logistics tail and everything else. But definitely living that was a little bit different than I lived on a completely different situation when I was in Baghdad, my first tour. But yeah, we get there, we get the company set. We immediately start ripping with the unit from 4th ID, and you talked about all this. The reason why the surge happened, the reason why we got extended, everybody did, is because conditions in Iraq, especially in Diyala, got so bad there in late 2006. I'll never forget, that few days that we ripped with 4th ID. They had bad days or bad times and good times, but it wasn't as intense, not just for them, but for everyone. But the conditions that led to the surge were so bad. When we were doing our right seat ride, I was driving with the company commander that I was replacing, and I was 2 vehicles back, and we were on Route Dover, which was the supply route up to Balad Air Base. And that was when we may talk about it later, first encountered a EFP, that really destructive new weapon that really came from Iran and hit several places in Iraq, but we definitely felt it in Diyala. And one of the Humvees of the ID unit we ripped with was destroyed, and they had several KIAs, and that was my first time out in sector doing a right seat ride with that company commander. I mean, just seeing that, they had several KIAs right there. Pretty much it was either day 1 or day 2 of our rip. And so that just showed. And then we were off to the bad races from there. Things just got worse and worse. And of course, they ripped out, we took over. And as you know, we had a tough fight for pretty much the whole 15 months.
Wow. I did not know you were a part of that convoy. Cause yes, I believe it was more like day 1. And
yeah.
Yes, I mean, that was a big deal. I mean, so the other info from that was the follow-up mission to see them put together a battalion wide mission so quickly and to flood that area and do what they do. But when the details came out of like a 55-gallon drum EFP, it was like, wow, that's pretty big. I mean,
yeah, and those guys were days from leaving theater, days, heading back to Kuwait for a little bit, but days, literally days from driving and flying out of Iraq, and they had soldiers being killed, a huge mission. So that was definitely Delta Company and the battalion's probably introduction to just how rough things were going to be for us. And at that point, we didn't even know it was going to be 15 months. So yeah, doing that right seat ride, I was in the Humvee with that commander from 4th ID and seeing his soldiers lost and everything, and then just went from there. And then as soon as I took over, I went to my first council meeting in my city, And we were greeted with, when we were driving down the road into Calais, which was my main city, about 150,000 people. I was headed to every Friday. We do a council meeting. As we were driving in my Humvee, I see several black things on the road ahead of us, and I can't tell what it is. And as we get closer, they were heads. That was the kind of welcome from Al-Qaeda or whoever's saying, welcome, First Cav. They know that about every year or so, U.S. units switch out. And that was kind of their welcome to Delta Company and to 112 in that area. Definitely eye-opening experience within the first hours and days of taking over and coming into Bakuba.
Yeah. I mean, how do you process that? I mean, that is a huge, like, wow, this isn't Baghdad, or this isn't what we thought it would be.
Even the toughest train-up part of, Shugart Gordon or whatever in JRTC, they couldn't match the intensity and just the craziness that we saw sometimes every day, but frequently every week in Bakuba and the surrounding areas.
Yeah. So talk us through Delta's mission, because you brought up a couple cities, so you're primary in.
Yeah, our mission was kind of unique. 112, a huge battalion, over 1,000. We had 2 tank companies, 2 infantry companies, engineer company, a lot of stuff. So we were spread around. And of course, 112, just like all units in Iraq, we never had enough soldiers for the mission. We were always overwhelmed. We did the best we could. The 2 infantry companies were kind of focused down in the main part of the city of Bakuba, where we anticipated the heaviest fighting, and that's where it usually was. The engineer company, of course, was all over. They were clearing routes. They were supporting. The other tank company, Charlie Company, was at a kind of a base near Bakuba for a while, and they kind of bounced around. But Delta Company, we had the unique mission. We were given that we had the biggest battle space in the battalion. It was like, I think they said it was almost like the size of the state of Delaware. It was everything north of Bakuba. The northern part of the Diyala province had several, big towns or smaller towns. The biggest town I mentioned was Calais, about 150,000 people. Numerous small towns, but unlike the city, the heavy, dense city of Bakuba, our company battle space was mostly farmland and rural, but it did have the Route Dover, which was the main convoy and supply route from Bakuba up to pretty much the only way to cross the river and to get over to Balad Air Base, which was a huge. And that, as we talked about, that's why the enemy forces used EFPs and stuff. One of my very first missions that Colonel Goldens gave us was to attack, try to neutralize that EFP cell, the bad guys that were putting the EFPs along that supply route. And took a few months of intelligence working with battalion and a lot of missions. But after a few months, we found that EFP cell and we neutralized it, and EFP attacks, stopped on Route Dover on that going to Balad. There's still EFP attacks, unfortunately, as we all saw throughout Diyala, but we really put a lot of effort, Delta Company, into stopping that. Delta Company had a unique mission. I just had 2 tank platoons, 1 infantry platoon, just 95 guys to cover essentially a battle space that was almost the size of the state of Delaware. Definitely, and we had other missions too, like the rest of the tanks and Bradleys in the battalion. We had to perform battalion QRF mission. So even though we were north of Bakuba and we were doing a lot of the stuff on routes and looking for Al-Qaeda guys and jam guys out in rural areas, and then I was doing my council meetings and stuff, but we still supported the battalion down in Bakuba, which was usually a heavy fight at least a couple times a week with QRF. But that was our main mission. We went after, and it would grow and we would find out more about our area, but we went after the IED makers, the financiers, a lot of the leadership of JAM and Al-Qaeda, and then we realized there was a huge Al-Qaeda cell operating in and around Calais. We found that out after a couple months. But Delta Company's mission was definitely different than Alpha or Bravo's mission down in Bakuba. But, I think that even though my area was important and all that kind of stuff, that the main effort for the battalion was still the city of Bakuba, where Alpha and Bravo were operating. So several months in February, I went to battalion. As we were in the fighting just kept getting thicker and thicker. Alpha and Bravo companies were just every day they were in some kind of fight, and they were in their cops in the city. So I went to Colonel Goins and I said, I realize I still have to control my area, operate in my area. I'd like to come down and help. So Delta Company started doing some company level missions down in the city of Bakuba in February. And that led to, unfortunately, losing some soldiers and stuff. But we also took the fight to the enemy before we all went down, later on for Arrowhead Ripper. So yeah, Delta Company was kind of unique. Going back to your question, that we operated north of the city and had that huge mission and the supply route and going after Al-Qaeda and Jam, but we also were heavily involved in the fight in the city of Bakuba.
And then you feel free to correct me. This, as you were joking earlier about your awesome T-shirt, that was 20 years ago, and your shirt has survived this long. You also had the the QRF backup mission for the MIT team, right? Because wasn't the MIT team?
Yeah, so there were several MIT teams, which were essentially, U.S. guys that were training with and working with the Iraqi army. So there was an Iraqi army battalion or headquarters in Calais as well, which was my main city. So we had the guys from the battalion, I think about 12 or 15 guys were on the MIT team up there. So some of those guys even came from Delta Company, like Lieutenant Miller was on that for a while. He was my former platoon leader who later on went on to be the scout platoon leader. So yeah, since they were in Calais, we supported them. We worked with them, and usually it was a rule that if you did a company level mission or a battalion mission, you had to take an Iraqi army platoon with you. So almost every company level mission that Delta Company did, we would go up to the Iraqi Army Battalion in Calais and grab at least a platoon of Iraqi Army guys to assist us in that. So yeah, we worked directly with and we supported the MIT team out of Calais for the whole 15 months.
You alluded to it throughout this conversation, the Dealer Alumni Association, or I would say, as I gradually made my way into the Dealer Alumni Association there is something that your company did better than all the other companies, and that was you had no problem using every resource you could. And when battalion would say, hey, we got these new things, I think before the whole subject came out of what this new thing is, you're like, we'll take them. Give me some.
Yeah, I would do anything and every. The Alumni Association started out as a joke, and I was kind of mad a little bit, not really mad at Colonel Goins, but he kept taking my platoon leaders, my lieutenants and stuff, because he needed them. He needed for jobs, and I was like, So Luke Miller was my platoon leader. He got grabbed to be the scout platoon leader. And then Al Sacknick was a platoon leader. He got grabbed to be the S2 and assistant S2. I said earlier, Josh Southworth, who was my XO, got grabbed to be the battalion S4, battalion battle captain. So they kept grabbing all my people to do stuff. So I finally said, hey, you know what? It's no longer just 112. It's the Dealer Alumni Association has its fingers in all the pots here. And like you said, and I made it a point. I really appreciated the staff guys up at the headquarters. So I worked closely with and had good relationships with the S1 guys. You guys in the S2 shop, really close with you guys, because as you know, no matter how great your fighters are, intel drives maneuver. So I would constantly be talking to the S2 shop to get the intel to lead me to, the Jam guys and Al-Qaeda guys and those caches that we were so successfully finding because of the intel. So yeah, we had connections to the Dealer Alumni Association. And then, like you said, any new toy or technology that would come down, we would grab it and use it. Some worked, some didn't, but I was all about, we had to, as I said before, I had 95 guys and I had this huge battle space to operate in. And there wasn't a single day in Iraq that I had all 95 guys to work with, because we had 5 guys on leave, people were sick or whatever. So, I'm a big boxing fan, and most people think you win at boxing by knockout. Knockouts are actually pretty rare. Most times you win by points, by the cards. So you gain the most points by jabbing. So I realized as soon as we got to Bakuba, I did not have enough combat power, or it would be rare for me to deliver a knockout blow to the enemy. There were just too many of them and too much space and too little. So I constantly worked at making the enemy not knowing what I was going to do, where I was going to be at. We constantly jabbed. We didn't deliver the knockout blow often, but we would jab everywhere. So I kept that, and it was funny. I'd go up to S2 shop, and I think you guys would tell me sometimes that, listening on their chatter, that they thought Delta Company was 3 times bigger than it was, because we would be everywhere. I would do company level missions weekly. I would have a platoon go out twice this day, not go out at all the next day, go into a different. So I kept everything in flux, which I know was hard on my guys, but just staying on our feet and always jabbing the enemy to keep them guessing what we were. And I had to do that. So I think that was part of the success of my guys in Bakuba, is that we just had such a unique mission in Delta Company. We were constantly jabbing, moving, just keeping the enemy guessing, because if they would have ever understood how small we were, 95 guys, we could have been overwhelmed, and we almost were a few times. but that was important.
Yeah. And like you were saying, the integration, the THT, the tactical humid teams, you were one of the only companies, regardless what platform you were rolling, tanks, or if you were in your Humvees, it made it even easier. You'd blend their Humvee in with yours and you used them. There was
Yeah.
no, oh, you guys are a force. I don't know if you're a force multiplier. Oh, you could become a hazard out there. You're like, nope. Oh, they can do this. Let's take them. And just all that intel you were able to get and then use in different ways because you actually integrated and took these teams out with you and built great relationships. I mean,
Yeah, we were real close, like you said, with the THT team. A couple of teams switched in and out, but the one that was there the longest, we were close with them. And we just had such a unique area, as I said. I mean, we were in some heavy fighting, but a lot of the times we had to do so much of the prep and the intel to find these Al-Qaeda and Jam leaders and these huge cash shots up in my area. So I depended on a lot of these force multipliers to help us shake the trees. I mean, it was so bad that our area, there were 2 Border Corps generals working directly for Iran that were kind of in with the Iraqi army. We discovered those. The police chief in Calais ended up working for JAM. So all these things we uncovered over our time, and just all this corruption, high level and low level corruption, plus Al Qaeda cells all over the place, JAM cells all over the place. But one of the ways that we helped uncover those and neutralize those threats was using these assets. Tons of intel assets, both from the battalion and external. I would use anything and everything. And half the time I begged Colonel Goins, I was like, give me another platoon. Give me another platoon for a week or something like that. And he was, the entire battalion was stretched thin, but we did the best with what we had, our 95 guys.
yeah. And the disruption, because as later on, we kind of had the theory that your sector was kind of the R&R, where people would rotate out of the city, go up there to get a little rest, get their wounds fixed, then they'd rotate back into the city. But once you start disrupting that, we saw big changes. And then, as you alluded to, when the fighting started getting really heavy into February, that's when Delta started pushing into Bakuba itself.
Yeah, just trying to add some more combat power. I mean, Delta Company was in Bakuba every week fighting with our QRF, but we didn't go down for company level missions until February. And that was just, Alpha and Bravo Company fighting the great fight down there, but they were constantly overwhelmed because just like us, they were outnumbered. So, when I went to Colonel Goins and said, I can't do it all the time, but I can probably do 1 or 2 company level missions a week, most weeks down in Bakuba on top of our battle space. So really pushed our guys, and our guys, Delta Company guys were tired and my guys worked so hard, but I saw Alpha and Bravo Company just being overwhelmed down there. Just like us, they were outnumbered. So I wanted to send our tank company down there to help out and, take the direct fight to the enemy. And we did that. Unfortunately, we had some horrible losses doing that, but I think we also disrupted the enemy and eventually were part of the success of defeating Al-Qaeda and JAM in the Bakuba area with Arrowhead Ripper and after.
Let me know if you don't want to talk about this or deep dive it, but you were talking about the horrible loss, and I think one of the big ones that we all remember was the H-borne IED.
Yeah, that was the worst day for me personally and for Delta Company in Iraq. But before that, over the course of the 15 months, unfortunately, we lost 5 Delta Company soldiers that were KIA. Numerous dozens were wounded, but 5 were KIA. The first one was Corporal Barta. And that was in December of 2006, just shortly after we got there. The last one was Specialist Trussell, and that was in May of 2007. But yeah, our worst day when I lost 3 of our soldiers, 3 of our guys from our infantry platoon, and that was Staff Sergeant Shaw, Staff Sergeant Ross, and Specialist Camacho. They were all killed simultaneously on the 9th of February. Like I said, once we started going down there and doing company level missions in Bakuba, unfortunately, we had intel that there was definitely a house that had some enemy activity, and we used surveillance and satellites, and we were watching it for a while, working with the S2 shop, and I put together that company mission to go down there to clear that area, approved by battalion. So we knew it was an enemy area. What we didn't know is, and it's just the way things work out sometimes, that it was also an HBIED, or I guess what's the correct term for homemade explosives. I guess. So it was like a factory for these homemade explosives that they were making, not really IEDs or VBIEDs, but a different kind of thing. So I guess that tactic had started, talking to the two shop after the fact, had started down in Baghdad a couple months ago, and we'd had some U.S. losses, but we had not seen that up in Bakuba up until that point. We didn't even know that it existed. I hadn't even heard of that, and battalion briefings from the S2 shop had never mentioned it. So it was definitely a surprise when we, like I said, we knew it was going to be enemy forces there. But as you know, we did the typical operation. I had tanks and Bradleys cordoning it off the area, outer and inner cordon, and then Blue Platoon, our infantry platoon, went in to clear this building. I had not received any enemy fire yet. It was kind of quiet, but we knew, they were probably going to be in there. And as my infantry platoon began clearing that building, I guess it was booby trapped. And all that homemade explosive, all that kind of stuff, when it went up, the whole house went up. It just came down. It was nothing but rubble. And unfortunately, my infantry platoon was inside there. So you had a whole squad or more that was totally buried underneath this rubble. We were trying to pull them out. Those 3 soldiers, Raw, Shaw, and Camacho, were killed pretty much instantly. That was horrible. But at the same time, their squad and other squads were buried in the rubble. We were trying to get the wounded out of there, take care of well on the ground. And then simultaneously, that's when the enemy attacked. So right when that building blew up, the infantry squads are, they're hurt. They're buried under rubble. We're trying to get our guys out of there. And then we get counterattack from multiple other houses around there that we didn't have any intel on. So, I'm in my tank at this point, and we're repelling fire from the enemy. They're engaging us from several different locations because, we kind of stirred up the hornet's nest. And at the same time, we're trying to get to our guys on the ground. It wasn't a simple evac because we literally had to pull guys out from, hundreds of pounds of rubble and medics on the ground doing that. So we neutralized this counterattack by the enemy pretty quickly. And then I was on the ground with the first sergeant and stuff, and we were just we were literally digging with our hands, crawling our hands and knees, trying to get our guys out of there. And we evac'd our wounded, all our casualties, and we got out of there. But yeah, that was definitely that day in February. Horrible day for Delta Company and the battalion, and really a lot of families losing 3 guys, several wounded, some of them pretty seriously. And I know they've had to deal with that both then and in the future. But the biggest thing was losing those 3 guys from the infantry platoon. That was hard on everybody.
Yeah, a company mission quickly became a battalion recovery mission.
Yes, it's the whole battalion. I'll call them back to battalion. Of course, we had Apache support and all that stuff. Like I said, we knew that there were bad guys in that building. We didn't realize how big of a mission that was going to be. We didn't realize it was a HBID factory like that. Definitely didn't know about the booby trap technique that I guess they had started doing in Baghdad months before. And then, that simultaneous attack while trying to evac wounded and dead on the ground, that was tough. That was a tough day. But, we got everybody back to the FOB. We did all the stuff we had to do for the wounded and stuff. But as you know, the mission couldn't stop. So Delta Company was back even the next day in our area. And soon enough, we were back in Bakuba doing more missions. Could not let the enemy win. I couldn't stop. But yeah, that was definitely the toughest day that I had in Iraq. And of any of my 3 deployments to Iraq.
Something that Delta did, once again, another thing that of course, you being the commander, so you were the one who probably played a big part in establishing these things, but I often joke about Delta worked hard and played hard. But, when you talk to some of the companies, being a little biased of being an HHC guy while also being a Delta alumni, you, like HHC, did a great job with your own unit barbecues and playoff games and, make sure there was you had the game stream. Or I guess we weren't streaming or whatever you did back then. We had AFM.
Early streaming,
but, the company, you worked hard, you did a lot, you pushed them, but you also rewarded your company very well. There was always something going on down in Delta land.
Yeah, I tried to, our guys, our soldiers and our NCOs and officers, they worked their butt off all 15 months, and I pushed them hard. They would do missions almost every day. We never had an off day. There wasn't a designated off day. Of course, we had to do maintenance on the tanks and Brads and Humvees and stuff like that. And, even if the guys would go out on a several-hour mission, they would get some time back. But yeah, that 15 months, I know it was a smoker for my guys. It was a smoker for everyone. So whenever I could, whether it be, like you said, a barbecue at the Chews or whatever, and then the Super Bowl party, we had, the Super Bowl in 2006. I was a huge Peyton Manning Colts fan. And of course, they were in the Super Bowl. So I go to the me and the First Sergeant go to the chow hall, and we get all the wings. I think the Super Bowl came on, because it was delayed. It was probably middle of the night, but we had a pretty big company Super Bowl party with wings and jalapeno poppers and all that stuff. And then, of course, we invited all those people that you talked about before, all the people that were not Delta Company, but we consider them, the Dealer Alumni Association. So the THT team was there, Air Force Combat Camera, which went out with us all the time. We had the Air Force Combat Camera were there. So we tried to do stuff like that, never take the place of friends and family back home, but we tried to do that as much as we could. And I tried to be, give the guys some kind of, blow off steam as much as we could.
Well, we've talked about it. I will tell you on this platform or this little chat, it meant a lot to me to be included. I know a lot of people, it was like you were saying, a chance to blow off some steam, a little bit of normalcy, just a moment to whether, the length of the game, length of the Super Bowl, to have some wings, hang out, everybody have a good time, just a chance to take a deep breath and almost escape for a moment.
Yeah, we needed that. And, Delta Company, like a lot of the companies, we just had so many different missions, whether we were fighting Bakuba. And then there were times where we were pulled away from 112 for a whole month. Operation Turkey Bowl 2, where we were in support of 573 Cab, who was out of the 82nd. They did a mission way southeast near the Iranian border. And they had gotten into some trouble down there. And then Operation Turkey Bowl 2 happened in January. And, so I left just one tank platoon back with my XO, and they had to watch all of our area for almost a month. But I took the other tank platoon, the infantry platoon, and my tank, myself, my crew, and we went down and fought pretty close to the Iranian border for almost a month. So that was also unique that we left 112 for a month. We're down there in, real austere conditions. It was kind of crappy. We were living off MREs, but when we opened up the MREs, we found that's all the food we had. Of course, we opened them up. We found out they were all liquefied and rotten because I guess those MREs had been in Iraq for a couple of years. They were stored in connexes that were 40 degrees for years. So the preservatives could not keep up with them. So yeah, there were times down that month during Turkey Bowl that we were living off. We would find an MRE that was still halfway decent, and we would share it. But yeah, that was one thing that every MRE that we had was bad. But my guys did great work down there, especially the infantry platoon working with 573. They ultimately, with 573, found to be the largest cache in OIF history, working with and supporting those 573 guys. But so that was unique. So I was gone from Bakuba area and really most of the company down there fighting with another unit for about a month. And Nick Pop and my XO at the time, he and one tank platoon really held on. And luckily, the enemy didn't realize that. Like I said, we were overwhelmed with the whole company, but Nick was down to about 15 guys and him guarding our whole company area for almost a whole month. So that was a unique thing that we did in January of 07.
Yeah, and that kind of takes us up to March, the arrival of the strikers. Did his arrival affect you in any way, or how?
Well, it was kind of weird because we were just so outnumbered, and the enemy was getting even more and more powerful and pushing out, like you said, in the springs. The hires, powers that be, sent another battalion in to help us in Bakuba. So not really in my area, but when the strikers came in, that's the first time I'd worked with the strikers. And I know they've augmented strikers a little bit. ADs were deadly even to the tanks. I remember when 520 came in, they had a horrible first couple missions with IEDs, losing vehicles, losing soldiers. So even at the influx of another battalion did not turn the tide right away. I didn't start working with those guys very much because we were still doing our thing up north of Bakuba until Arrowhead Ripper. And that was when even another unit came in, another striker brigade coming in. So Bakuba just continued to swallow up, 112 punching and doing great things, but just outnumbered, and so much that they sent in new battalions and then additional almost a brigade. And that's what it finally took to do it. Yeah. So, but 520, there's just one example of many units that came in, and, Delta Company continued to do those kind of missions. And then in May, right before Arrowhead Rippers, one of the last big events that Delta Company had before Arrowhead Ripper, there were, if you remember this, there was a bunch of intel that Al-Qaeda was running prison camps in the palm groves and stuff south of Bakuba, way out in the middle of nowhere. We kept hearing about this, and I know some guys from 112 couldn't find them, and we did a battalion mission where we went down into, we took the whole battalion down into the palm groves. And I remember Delta Company had been fighting and doing so much stuff. We hadn't had a day off in months. And I went to Colonel Goins. I was like, sir, I just need one day. Let me have a day to do maintenance and refit. And he said, you got it. And then right before that day was supposed to happen, he comes to me and he's like, hey, we're doing this battalion mission down there. We think there's, these Al-Qaeda prison camps. I know I said we'd give you the day off, but we need you. So I was like, okay, yep, no day off. So I told the guys, I'll have to give you a day off next time we're going to go. And then Colonel Goins was like, and I got a problem. He said, Charlie Company's commander is on leave. So I also need you not only command Delta Company for this mission, but I need you to command Charlie Company for this mission too. And I was like, okay, so for that mission, I've got sort of the operational command of my company and Charlie Company. And, they're in the battalion, but I'd never worked with them, but those are not my guys. So trying to command two companies in my tank with only two radios. So I needed a third radio, still trying to talk to battalion, trying to operationally control two companies while doing that. That was unique. The Delta Company, and once again, my guys just doing great work. The infantry platoon were the first one to found it, but we were down there way south and southeast of Baqubah and in those palm groves, very thick. And we found them. We actually found those Al-Qaeda prison camps. So my infantry platoon, Blue Platoon, was the first to find them, but we actually found the Al-Qaeda prison camp, liberated it, and we freed 41 prisoners. And it was this horrible state of torture those guys were in. So yeah, that was a big deal because that got a lot of attention all the way up to division level and higher, that Al-Qaeda had started doing these prison camps out in the middle of nowhere. But once again, just giving the credit to my guys for their hard work and doing something awesome like finding those Al-Qaeda prison camps and rescuing those 41 guys. So that was the last major big mission that I give props to our guys before the huge brigade and above mission that would be Arrowhead Ripper, that final 2-month fight where we ultimately cleared Bakuba and neutralized the enemy there before we went home.
Yeah. No, that prison camp I think that's a story all on its own and can talk a lot about that. And, yeah, just finding the evidence and things that were found there. I mean, it was a eye-opening experience. And yeah, the sectarian violence at that period was just out of control. I mean,
yeah, I'll never, a lot of memories, crazy stuff that you can't prepare for. But, when Blue Platoon told me about that, and then I get to that location, jump on the ground, and we're rescuing those guys, and we just see the horrible condition and see how they were tortured. That was something, that I'd never experienced before, that level of torture against these Iraqi civilians by Al-Qaeda. It was a great day that my guys we were able to find that series of camps, and liberate them and free those guys. So I was real proud of my guys for doing that. The infantry platoon, really the whole company for doing that. But yeah, that was, there's always funny and crazy stories about Iraq, but I call that the day off. That was supposed to be Delta Company's day off, and we end up participating in that battalion level mission where I had to, for a very short time, controlling two companies, and then us doing that. So that's the day off mission, as I always think about it.
Yeah, that's your reward for all your good work there. There's a day
off. My poor guys, of course, all the officers, NCOs exhausted, but the most tired were our soldiers of Delta Company. They were just smoked because we've been going nonstop. We'd come back from Turkey Bowl and then nonstop operations. And then what made it worse is that I promised them the day off, and I was like, "Oh, you're going to get your day off, guys." And then it turned out to be, another couple days of battalion missions. Great stuff that came out of it, but I know my guys were just exhausted, and I still to this day appreciate how hard they worked.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into the build up, because Delta Company had a very nice footprint down there all by itself with the Battalion S4. But then all of a sudden, 520 shows up, then Arrowhead Ripper, and all of a sudden buildings start getting thrown up everywhere. More
And at the same time, even though we still lived on the FOB partially, that was also when we had a COP out in the city of Bakuba, not far from Biarritz, that, I had two platoons that were out there and one platoon that I would rotate back. But that was when I moved out to that COP, and we lived on that COP for a couple of months. Mm-hmm. Our little base surrounded by the enemy in Indian territory, as they used to call it. So that was kind of unique for a few months. We still did missions. That was when we kind of left. I told Colonel Goins and the Sergeant Major at one point, I was like, Delta Company, not only are we tired from working every day, but at one point we switched battle spaces. In the course of 1 month, we switched 3 battle spaces. So one thing about you learn your battle space, you learn your area, the streets, the people. That helps with missions, but just because and I understand why they had to do it, but the nature of the mission changing and what Colonel Goins needed. So Delta Company had to move battle spaces 3 times in a very short time. And so we moved from the area north of Bakuba, Calais and all that. And then we moved down to our COP. And then at one point we even moved near Biarritz, and we owned the Biarritz area, which had been owned by Bravo Company. So we were all over the place. And then Arrowhead Ripper happened where the whole battalion went down. And I mean, all of us were fighting day to day for weeks there in the middle of the city. And that was the heaviest fighting. That was when, a lot of the General Order 1 stuff where you could not fire, heavy artillery in the city, that got lifted. I can remember having to call in, our heaviest artillery 155 howitzer on targets in Bakuba. And I remember when, you couldn't do that. And also, the big prohibition about going into mosques and clearing them. Anytime there was enemy activity or anything near a mosque, we would have to have the Iraqi army or the Iraqi police go. U.S. soldiers were never permitted to go into a mosque. But for a very short period during Arrowhead Ripper, they actually released that prohibition. And I remember one mission, Arrowhead Ripper, we were in a several-hour firefight following these guys to the city, and they actually moved into a mosque. And so we got permission to go in. That's the one only time that I've been inside a mosque and seen it, where we actually went in there and there were enemy fighters fighting in the mosque. We found a small cache that they'd been using inside the mosque. But that was one of those unique things. I had 3 different deployments, 3 years in Iraq, and I never was allowed to do anything inside a mosque. That was how crazy and powerful the fighting was during Operation Arrowhead Ripper, that we were calling in heavy artillery and actually, for a short period, clearing mosques of enemy forces.
Yeah, that definitely shows the emphasis and the dedication to truly clear Bakuba. And like you were saying, the whole time Delta's jumping around, you're still doing the same thing of integration of resources, intel. I remember coming out, spending a little time at your wonderful little COP, and the dealer spirit still going on out there, where, play hard, work hard, and all the other good stuff that just helped take the tension off a little bit. But, like you said, your little outpost, you're like, see, come camp out here and do your thug dizzle, do what you do, and the rewards from that. But Arrowhead Ripper was definitely the climax, clearing Bakuba. After Arrowhead Ripper, did you notice a change within your sectors? Or actually, did you go back north? What happened to Delta after Arrowhead Ripper?
We did. So Arrowhead Ripper, as you know, was a couple months there, just heavy fighting. It was a little bit of counterinsurgency, but that was the heaviest fighting. That was when we got back to, like I said, as a lieutenant, it was nothing but, there was no counterinsurgency. It was just tank on tank fighting. So Arrowhead Ripper, there was no tank on tank fighting, but we were in tanks and Bradleys every day, heavy. I mean, we were clearing building to building, sometimes room to room. The Al-Qaeda forces that had essentially put up their flag in Bakuba and said, this is now the headquarters of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And so the company and the battalion, we had to clear out Bakuba, and that was a hardcore fight. A lot of the stuff, the counterinsurgency, working with the locals and, building wells and schools, that went out the door, and we had to do that heavy fighting for weeks and weeks, where tanks were getting destroyed and artillery support. I mean, that was a more conventional style city fight like you would have seen back in World War II or something like that. That was definitely the heaviest fighting that I've been in. And I've seen and that was no Humvees for us. That was back into only tanks and Bradleys. And we were even losing tanks and Bradleys. So heavy fighting. Al-Qaeda was dug in, and they realized that, there was nowhere. We had them blocked in, so they decided to fight to the death. I remember that my infantry platoon was they were clearing rooms, and sometimes they were clearing out closets. Guys would be wounded and near death, an enemy fighter in a closet, still fighting, still throwing grenades. So yeah, definitely heavy fighting that took weeks and months, but 112 and the Striker Brigade that came in, we eventually did clear all the enemy forces out of Bakuba. We pacified Bakuba, and then kind of went back. Delta Company went back to our COP near Biarritz, and very shortly after Arrowhead Ripper, because of all the fighting and because all the enemy forces that the battalion, the company had killed in Arrowhead Ripper, a lot of the violence and stuff stopped. But I think the final straw, and this happened all over Iraq, started with the Sunni Awakening out in Western Iraq, and it spread everywhere, where we started working with the Sunni leadership, even some that had been our enemies before, against Al-Qaeda. So to answer your question, yeah, right after Arrowhead Ripper, we noticed a huge drop off in attacks against us and an enemy activity because we started working very closely, very directly with some of those militias, some that we had actually fought against months before. But working with them, we eliminated the rest of the Al-Qaeda remnants in and around Bakuba. Violence dropped, I would say, 80–90%, almost within a week. But it's kind of crazy, though. You're working with people, some former enemies, militias, that these are guys that months ago that you'd been fighting against, and now they're allied with you. I'll never forget one of the leaders of these militias. Of course, I'm working with him, talking with him, an interpreter. He provides us, or Intel provides us a list of names and locations of all these Al-Qaeda guys. And so he jumps in my Humvee with me, the militia leader, Sunni militia leader, who had at one time, just a few months ago, been an enemy, and we're going to get these guys. And they helped us greatly finding these guys, identifying them, and then neutralizing them. But we're going down the list, and he's saying, "Oh, yep, that guy is here." And then he starts laughing. And I asked the interpreter, I'm like, "What's he laughing about?" And this guy's like, "I'm on the list." And we're all like, that's funny. So, that just tells you how crazy. That's just one instance for Delta Company. I'm sure that happened in a lot of companies, battalions all over Iraq, that guys that were our enemy, that were, shooting at us a few months ago, and that I would have been tracking down and either killing or capturing. Now I'm working with him, and he even sees his name on a list of guys that we need to get. And he thought it was funny. I didn't think it was very funny, but ultimately, I had to do, and leadership across Iraq had to do, we did as we were ordered. We partnered with these Sunni militias, and the violence stopped. 89% stopped almost overnight. So our last couple of months in Bakuba, we were still in our area, still doing patrols and stuff, but definitely Al-Qaeda. JAM had kind of gone quiet at that point, and Al-Qaeda was almost non-existent. So our last couple months in sector, after hard fighting for over a year, where we had lost, tons of soldiers injured and killed across the battalion, the company and the battalion. But those last couple months, it definitely got very quiet, and it was all because of that part of the whole Sunni Awakening that took over place all over Iraq.
Yeah, there were some awkward moments, like you're retelling the story of the guy in your Humvee, but yeah, it was very eerie how it switched and got quiet, and it didn't feel like a win, but it felt like, okay, at least no one's dying, but it still felt like something's still not right. But
it was a huge difference for the company and the battalion once, especially after fighting that whole year plus, after coming out of the heavy fighting of Arrowhead Ripper. But once we started working with those Sunni militias, and once the end of that violence, I know the battalion was happy, but we had, as a whole battalion, we had lost so many soldiers, injured and killed, and it felt like it was no end in sight. So that drop in violence those last couple of months we were there, that was, it felt like that we went to Iraq to try to kill or capture the enemy, but ultimately it was to make life better for the Iraqi people. You very rarely saw that. At the end of Arrowhead Ripper, that's when you finally saw, okay, out of my 3 years in Iraq, that was probably the one and only time that I felt like, and I could actually see that conditions are better. It's actually getting better for the Iraqi people, both security-wise and just living day to day.
Yeah, the safety aspects, stores started opening, shops.
Yeah.
City life started to return to normal.
Yeah. So that was great. As after 15 months of being there, and as we're leaving, I don't know if all the soldiers saw that and felt that way, but I personally did. That like I said, my one and only time in 3 years in Iraq that I actually saw a change and I actually felt better. I was like, okay, maybe all the sacrifice we've done, it's worth it, because you can hear these stories, you can hear the propaganda, but as a person, or at least for me, I have to see the change on the ground. And for those last couple months that we were in Bakuba, I actually saw a change on the ground, and that was great.
Yes, it was. So how would you say Bakuba affected you for the rest of your career, or is there any highlights of or things you want to share about Bakuba after?
Well, just like anything, you as infantry, armor, or combat arms, you train for combat. You're the whole reason you're in the Army. Your whole existence, the Army, is to come into direct fire contact with the enemy and defeat the forces of America and our allies. And so we did that. But of course, it was tough. But all the lessons that I learned, all the experiences, both good and bad in Bakuba, of course, I carried those through the rest of my career. I was still kind of an older captain then, but, from captain all the way up until when I retired as lieutenant colonel, various jobs and stuff, I carried that with me. And I still carry it with me today, both the good times and bad. You and I and other members of the Alumni Association, we share the crazy stories, some that are not fit for sharing with everybody, but all the craziness that you can only experience in wartime, the horror, the misery, and the horrible conditions, and all that stuff that only soldiers can experience in war, but also the crazy stories and the camaraderie with your friends. Going to war is like nothing else. It's the worst thing on earth, but there are parts that you find that the good parts in it, and whether that's your friends, your allies, even funny times. The Army would kind of have gallows humor sometimes, where something that somebody else would think, man, that's horrible, but that's the only way you survive, to tell jokes and stories. So yeah, I was kind of crazy at times, whether I was Dealer 6 or Diggler 6. The craziness that we did, whether it dining ins before we went to Bakuba, or those times that we did crazy things in Bakuba, but it was all about taking care of soldiers, winning, achieving the mission, and getting everybody home. Yeah, but I've kept those with me. The crazy thing is, we left Bakuba right after we got back to Fort Hood. I got promoted to major, and then just like everybody else, I left. I missed the next first cab deployment, the one that went to Mosul. I missed that. In fact, that's the only first cab deployment to Iraq that I missed, because I went to grad school in Hawaii, and then I went to Command and General Staff College. But the crazy thing is, after just being, so I'd only been gone, so not even 2 years in grad school and then a year in ILE. So not even 3 years later, I get assigned right back to Fort Hood, right back to first cab, and right back to 112. So I left 112 as a company commander, as a captain, and I show back up as a major, same battalion that I'd fought in all that time. And then I'm the battalion S3, and we're going back to Iraq. So my third and last deployment to Iraq, this time I was the S3, the operations officer for 112. And there were actually 3 Delta Company soldiers still in Delta Company then. Debo, I think he was Sergeant Debo then, and he was a younger guy when I'd known him before. And then 2 of my former E5s that were both E7s and were platoon sergeants. So it was crazy to come back, as now I'm a major in the S3 and going back to war with 112. And every once in a while I'd see those 3 guys from Delta Company, and I'd remember, hey, I remember when I was a company commander. So yeah, I've taken those lessons, both good and bad. And then, later I was at OC at the NTC. So for 3 years, I saw 10 rotations a year for those 3 years. So, that's 30 brigades of the Army. That's almost the whole Army over those 3 years that I saw come through, and I helped train guys and gals to go to either Iraq or Afghanistan. So I tried to share as many of those lessons, both the good, the bad, the mistakes, and the good stuff that I learned in Bakuba, and from my soldiers, from all my great NCOs in the company and the battalion, and then from the great leadership we had in the battalion, then Major Posnick, Colonel Goins, or Major Harris, all the lessons we learned, I tried to, as much as I could remember, tried to pass that on to all the units that came through the NTC when I was in OC for 3 years. But that was kind of me, as much as I could, giving back. These were a lot of times young guys and gals who had not been to Iraq, and they were heading off into combat. So I tried to impart all the lessons learned from Bakuba and my other 2 deployments to Iraq as well. Try to get back to those 30 brigades of the Army. But yeah, but other than that, just today, I'm an old retired guy, but just trying to remember the stuff. You've jogged a bunch of memories today, things I hadn't thought about in a while, but I keep in touch with, some of the guys, some of my former platoon leaders, and my XOs, Josh Southworth and Nick Poppin. Talked to Colonel Goins not too long ago. I live in Florida now, so I haven't been in Texas in a while, and I know people are all over. I haven't seen people in person in forever, but I do keep in touch, and I appreciate, Debrief Project, how awesome this is to highlight all the great stuff our soldiers and NCOs and leaders did, all the hardships and the good times and bad in Bakuba. So I think this is a great platform. I'm honored that I was asked to be just a small part of it. Yeah, I was the S3 and the XO for 112. So when I came back, I was the S3 for a year, and we went to Basra for a year. That was the last Iraq deployment for first cav. That's when we actually shut the door and of course, U.S. forces would come back in Iraq a few years later. But I'll never forget, our battalion was the last, 112 was the last battalion in Iraq, and we were right on the border with Kuwait and Iraq. We actually handed them the keys to this silly gate in the middle of the desert, and we walked out of there. But yeah, that was when I was the S3 for a year. We came back to Fort Hood, and I was the XO for 112 for 15 months back at Fort Hood as we trained up for other stuff. And then I left 112 in 2013 and went out to the NTC to be OC.
During those field grade years, you were with Pause, right?
Yeah, so Posnick had come in, then Major Posnick. He was our battalion S3 when we were in Bakuba. And then he became Brigade S3. And then, and then I went my separate way. He went his separate way. And then he was selected to command 112 when we were going back to Basra. I came out of Command and General Staff College and I showed up. He was the commander. So we went to Iraq for my third time, and that was in 2011. That then Colonel Posnick was the battalion commander for 112, and I was his S3, his operations officer for that whole year in 112.
Yeah, I know we talked a little bit before though, but I know it was more the household stuff, but I guess so Adams also stayed in touch with him. Did you stay in touch with Adams?
Not that much. I lost track. So when I was out at the NTC, for those 3 years, that I joked that even 3 years in Iraq, I spent more time in the field just being miserable at the NTC because we do a rotation every month. We did 10 rotations a year, and the rotations would last 3+ weeks. So I would go out for 2 or 3 days in the desert, Death Valley, and then come back for a day just to shower, get more food, and then go back. So for those 3 years, I was in the field more than I'd ever been. It was almost like being in Iraq and just not get. In fact, I was shot at a few times doing live fire, blue units. There were several times that my OC Humvee almost got peppered with real rounds accidentally. But yeah, I lost track, and it was hard to keep in touch with people because I was so in the field. I talked to Josh Southworth and Pop, and so I had not talked to Colonel Posnick. He left in 2012. I had not talked to him very much because I know he went up to the War College, Carlock, Pennsylvania. I was doing that stuff, so I hadn't talked to him very much, and I was doing OC stuff up to my eyeballs in sand and miserable half the time. So unfortunately, though, I got a call one night from Nick Poppin, and I think he was at Monterey then at Naval Postgraduate, and he said that he had heard that Colonel Posnick had died. So that's when I first heard it. Nick Poppin, my old XO, told me that Colonel Posnick had died, and then my wife was friendly with his wife and everything, and then we kind of heard through the wife channel simultaneously and through the guy. So yeah, while I was out at Fort Irwin is when I heard about Colonel Posnick passing.
Yeah, definitely tough. Of course, him being more high visibility. I know HHC, we've had a few. So yeah, it's definitely a tough subject.
Yeah, like I said, and I had not talked to him in a while, and he has to go through their own stuff. And I know I found out after the fact he was dealing with some stuff. So, it's sad that we were not talking like on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis then, just because various things. But yeah, it's unfortunate about his passing, and I knew his kids and met them several times, and been over their house, and my wife was friends with Colonel Posnick's wife, and so it was tough for everybody. Of course, tough for their family. Horrible to hear when anything like that happens. But yeah, definitely an eye opener. To work with the guy so many years, and then to been under his command and everything, and then that to happen, and then kept in touch off and on with Colonel Goins. Colonel Goins got promoted to full bird and then commanded a brigade and went to Afghanistan. I told Colonel Goins, I was like, man, I really wish that you would have been a brigade commander again. That would have been awesome to serve underneath him once again, just like Bakuba, because it was kind of unique that, Colonel Posnick and I served together again. Most of the battalion, those 3 guys in Delta were still there. But after a year or two, any Army unit, everybody splits to the wind. So it was definitely unique to work with Colonel Posnick again for my last Iraq deployment, and it's unfortunate when and how he passed.
Yeah, no, and like you were saying, everybody hit the 4 wins after that second deployment, but then to cross paths again. I don't know if you remember him. He was in the FSO. He was in the Fisters. Cook, Staff Sergeant Cook. He was,
I think so,
First Sergeant Cook in the HHC. Wow. Of the battalion I command the FSC in. So me and him would go back and forth about Bakuba all the time and bullshitting. And
oh, that's awesome. Yeah, there were a couple times like my maintenance chief, who was an E5 then, and he was a mechanic. He was a tank mechanic for our company, throughout both the train up and Bakuba. I briefly ran into him years later. He became a warrant officer.
Okay.
So that was then Sergeant Chavez and then Chief Chavez. So I ran into him. So every once in a while, the Army is a small place. You run into people. I would run into people out at the NTC, as units were coming through. But definitely, yeah, that was kind of coming home when I was the S3 of an XO of 112. So I've spent so much of my career and over 2 years of my life in combat with 112 Cav. So
Wow.
112 is definitely, regimentally affiliated with them, and that's being both the company commander in heavy combat and then the S3 in combat. Definitely 112 is very special to me.
Dig that out, or is that like
I
in
did.
the?
This is I wear this frequently, usually when I'm going to the gym or whatever. I have two left because I bought two and they've lasted the test of time. They're a few little holes and stuff, but slowly but surely they're hanging on.
That's impressive. I will. I will.
Yeah, I had these made for the company. Right, this was the year before Bakuba when I took over. Yeah, so it's been I guess 2006. They've been hanging on since then.
Man, yeah. Who has 20-year shirts laying around
Yeah.
and still wearing them? Man, so that means you didn't do the post-army blow up either. You just stayed the same.
Well, I'm trying. I retired in December of 22, so I still go to the gym and run. I don't run as much as I used to, but I've packed on a few pounds. But I'm trying to still fit in my clothes, which it's a fight, but I'm still hanging on.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, if you're ready to get going, we can get going. But is there any other like debrief project info you wanted to find out about, or?
I don't think so. You and I, like I said, I follow it on LinkedIn and just recently started following it on YouTube. I need to explore more. I've watched some of the debriefs. I have not watched all of them. I know there are several and some of them are pretty long. So I'm behind on that. I've been tracking it longer than I've watched all the separate debriefs. So I've got a backlog I need to watch, but I don't think so. I mean, I understand the general mission, which I think is great, just to get kind of the message and the history out as the unit and the location, but also the people that were there that served. Great mission.
Yeah. The newer ones are a lot smaller. We're not doing the 4 hour just tell us everything. I mean, hey, if somebody would love to do that, we have a different kind of program for that. But actually, I just sat down with Alex Rivera yesterday. So
Okay, cool.
he's out there. So yeah, so you, Alex, Conley, Chapman, and I don't know why I'm drawing a blank, but the engineers. We've got a
Tillman.
lot of y'all. Yeah, Tillman. Thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of unique because a lot of us, the first set of company commanders took command, the year before Bakuba, so we were all there for that year-long train up, and then most of them switched out several months into Bakuba. I was one of the lucky ones that stayed in command the entire time. Finally, division said all company commanders have to, change out for the reset coming up, going back. So I stayed in command till about a month before we left Bakuba. But yeah, I was lucky that I was with Delta Company for 28 straight months. All company at command is, I think that's pretty rare.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 28 months. That's insane.
Yeah, it was so long, 28 months. I had 3 first sergeants, I had 3 XOs, and numerous platoon leaders over that time. But I guess that's kind of natural, just with the ebb and flow of personnel and things going on and people moving up. Yeah, going through that many first sergeants and XOs was both fun and not fun. It just depended. So
Yeah. Yeah. Cause that was during the time period. Captain was what, 18 months, 16 months?
yeah, if you needed to do 12 months in command to be technically branch qualified, and guys usually did, on or about 18 months if they did one command, and then if you got selected for another command, HAC or whatever, so you might do 24 months spread over 2 commands, or about 18 for one. And just because the way things worked out, I just stayed with Delta Company, which I loved. Didn't want to move up. Headquarters Company is its own beast. I was a HACXO, so I know how special headquarters companies are. But yeah, I was happy to stay with a tactical fighting company for the whole 28 months. And like I said, for the whole time in Bakuba up until about the last month or so before we returned to the States.
Yeah. Then the lieutenants, I remember lieutenants had a shorter promotion from lieutenant to captain too. So that probably led to some of your turnover?
Yeah, and I got a bunch of when I started out, my first set of lieutenants were all brand new second lieutenants, and then they quickly made first lieutenant, and then of course, we may talk about later the dealer alumni association, just the way it worked out that so many lieutenants actually went up and worked in different jobs throughout the battalion, and that's where I kind of came up with the alumni association. I said that the whole battalion, or definitely the headquarters, was really staffed and controlled by Delta Company. Not really, but I kind of said that and kept it up that we at Delta Company had our fingers in every pot all over battalion. But yeah, I had those, and then of course XOs were usually first lieutenants, and then they quickly would make captains. So, and then just a couple months before, like maybe 2 months before I gave up command and we were getting close to leaving, I made the promotion list for major. Didn't pin on yet, but so I was getting kind of long in the tooth, especially when I was getting close to that 28 months and straight in commands. Yeah, it's just the way things go. And then I was lucky, though, I got to keep the platoon sergeants, the same set of platoon sergeants just about the whole time, which, platoon sergeants really, I think, are the key to the success of a company, really helping to run that thing, helping to train that young lieutenant and just keeping the platoons going, which are the most important part of the company. So I was lucky to keep the platoon sergeants pretty much static the whole time. No, it didn't have him. So he was, Charlie Company. So another weird thing, I'm supposed to have armor or even infantry if I got an infantry platoon leader. But the way things worked out, I guess we were short 112 armor. So they started replacing my tank platoon leaders with infantry platoon leaders. So a few of my tank platoons over the course of all that time had infantry lieutenants who were the platoon leader. Didn't really know anything about tanks. They learned really quick. And then I even had, Scott Siggins he's an artillery guy. He was my FSO. And when there were some personnel moves and one of my original infantry platoon leader moved on, I pushed really hard with battalion, and they decided they put Scott Siggins as the platoon leader in my infantry platoon, even though he was an artillery guy. But he learned infantry stuff real quick and was very successful.